something that has shown up for me is the diversity piece.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Eric Planey.
Hello, I'm Lucas Finko.
And we are normally the Pirates of Clean Tech, but today we are the Pirates 3 of Clean Tech because we have with us a fantastic special guest star. Ladies and gentlemen, the fantastic Cassandra John.
Hi, everyone.
She is a good friend of ours that goes back probably 5-6 years now, which is hard to believe. And Cassandra, in 2019, along with another friend of ours, founded SIF Capital. And SIF Capital, we'll let her explain a little bit about that. But it's a fantastic organization. And why don't you actually explain a little bit about that? And then we can talk about how we all know each other.
Sure. So I started SIF Capital in 2019 to help early stage clean energy companies access capital markets. What was really interesting, and I'm sure this is something many of you in the early stage or investing space are familiar with, most companies will say, I need to raise $2 million in equity. And it's like $2 million is the magic number. And once you start to dig into that, you figure out that it's not necessarily $2 million in equity. It's maybe $200,000 to do this one particular project, which I think will allow me to get revenues to where I need $5 million of project finance or working capital. And the challenge is that so many companies now and entrepreneurs, they approach the space of starting a company in the sense of, I have to do it in this very, very particular path. And sometimes that path works for companies, but for other companies who maybe don't have hyper growth or are not interested in hyper growth, there's other paths they can take and they don't know how to get on there. So we do a lot of work to help make sure the companies and the clients that we have are looking to raise capital in the right way that works for their, their ultimate goals and the type of company that they want to be when they grow up.
Wow, that's fantastic. Why don't you talk about a little bit about what was the justification or motivation for you to actually found it? Like, what kind of void did you see in the VC marketplace, especially for clean energy, that prompted you to say, I'm going to put my shingle up and we're going to do this because there's a need for it?
Sure. So prior to founding SIF Capital, I was running capital markets at an energy efficiency company called Spark Fund in Washington, D.C. I was there for about 3 years. And part of my job was helping them to raise debt capital. And what I discovered is that you have really great technology companies, great technology, great people, great ideas, and they have an opinion or review of institutional capital, of finance, as you know, the big boogeyman. And then folks in finance really want to deploy capital. They're not holding on to dollars and wanting to keep it for themselves. They want to invest it, they want to lend it, but they don't necessarily know how to communicate with smaller companies, because finance will say, I need these 10 or 15 documents in this particular order because that fits my process. And a small company will say, I've given you a great idea and I'm going to get revenues. I promise you I'll do it. Lend me the money or invest in me. And so there's this gap in terms of communication style. There's this gap in understanding of each other. And it's not anything malicious. It's just the nature of who's sitting on these different sides. And I thought to myself, how do you bring these sides together? So once I decided to leave Spark Fund, primarily to come back to New York, which is where my family was, I was trying to figure out what to do with myself. And a really good colleague of mine introduced me to someone at Energetic Insurance, where I do some consulting work right now. And in talking to him and deciding to start consulting with them on a one-on-one basis, I said, this is something that I can bring to more than just potentially a relationship that I know, but to open it up to other people to be able to get what I hope is useful expert advice, and to help them grow their companies as well.
Oh, it's fantastic. Lucas, any questions?
No, I think that's great. I think you've got a really good angle there with helping companies, making sure that their pitches make sense. I think that really resonates with me a lot. And I also see that they get advice on how to pitch things, or you must have a business plan, and they don't think about their business and what they need and what will resonate. And I think investors also, they don't want to see a polished pitch from howtobuildadeck.com. They want to see you and what's your company and what do you do and what do you need and how are you going to get there, where are you going to go. So I really like that.
I agree. And I love your first point, which as a banker, I've seen this over the years so many times with entrepreneurs. They come in and they have an idea and they want this big dollar amount because nobody has really broken down, both cash flow and immediacy for them, right? So they'll say, I need $2 million right now. But when you actually get into it, they don't need 2 million right now. They need to get to a point where they're generating enough cash flow to justify the next round. And it's fantastic that you're walking through people like that because it gives them more access than they probably would have had they just tried to do this by themselves. So what's been your biggest surprise now that you've been in this for a year or so? Like what has kind of maybe something you didn't think about in terms of what type of person would come and look you up? And also how has like the last 6 months, which has just been absolutely crazy, as capital markets and your type of end market user, has it changed at all?
I would say probably 3 points. One, we're likely going to touch on a little bit later, but something that has shown up for me is the diversity piece. I've had different conferences I've attended, and the cool thing about conferences we're having now, the virtual conferences, is that it actually opens up networking because you're not talking to the people that you've met before. You're now actually engaging these one-on-ones for folks that hopefully fit both your target investment thesis and also what your company can offer. And I've had, I'd say, more conversations than I can count on 2 hands of folks telling me, oh, it's nice to see someone who has a different background than what I've typically seen in an investor, or has a background that looks a little bit more like mine. So I've had a lot of clients that have said, and it's not a a statement, but diversity does matter, whether whether it's whether you're a minority or your gender or whichever. It matters because it helps people feel comfortable to have conversations that they typically wouldn't have. So I've seen a little bit of an uptick there. The second piece is when it comes to capital markets, up until I would say coronavirus hit, but also what we saw with, unfortunately, with WeWork, and you're seeing with a number of the potential IPOs that are going up and maybe not necessarily getting away to public markets, there's been a period of time where value has been divorced from valuation. And coronavirus has forced those 2 things back together. That's both good in one way because it means the investment and due diligence processes are getting a little bit deeper to make sure that the investments and the lending is appropriate for what it is. But it's also been challenging because there are some clients who started into the investment or fundraising process and they just had general expectations, which have now been, to say nicely, have been a bit crushed in terms of what they've expected for valuation or equity that they can get. Again, though, that's not necessarily a bad thing because overall it forces everyone to sharpen their pencils and to think about what is a good, solid, at least, if not profitable or a break-even company, and how to get there more thoughtfully. So those are probably the second set of clients that I've seen. And then the third is folks that it's what I call long shot ideas. Great technology potentially in the future. And these are folks that are not necessarily looking for fundraising. What I say is they've gone through this process, they haven't successfully raised, but they're still out there more so now just looking for conversations and general advisory. And in a growth market, folks are less open to hearing, maybe I need to retool or adjust. In a tightened market, they're recognizing that everybody is. And so I'm getting clients that just want general advisory and just talk me through where I am, where I could go, is this worthwhile? And that's actually been really, I personally find those the most interesting. All of them are interesting, but because sometimes we forget that behind the technology and behind the companies, it's individual people who are taking quite a bit of risk to build something or to try something. And it's great to have some of those clients and to form those personal connections.
That's fantastic. I think before we go into the headlines, and we are going to talk a little bit more about diversity at the end of this broadcast, but I think my last question for this segment, Cassandra, is you and I were actually in the NYU Energy Finance program together in 2015. And I just want to get your opinion. Who was the worst professor that you had in that program and why? Because I certainly have my story. I'd like to hear your story.
Terrible.
Well, I don't know. It's just this professor who just was sort of just like walk into class and go, let's talk about electricity markets. And, he just had this whole tone of like, I've been over this before and we're going to get through. But I would like to say that not just the overall program, but the introduction to electricity markets, the very, very, again, it's not different than what I've seen before. We can all get lost in the technical details of this thing, that item, but being able to say, why do we see drift in terms of seasonality in electricity uses? I don't know. It's summer here. We use air conditioners, and to start to think about how markets work, it's not a random thing. It is driven by specific behaviors. And when you think about the pricing of things and how that's driven by what is peak, why does peak matter? What's the regulation around that? I found that that particular professor, he ended up being quite a useful resource, who I still reach out to on occasion. Yeah, sometimes, Lucas.
I actually thought that professor was German, so I just remember talking very slow and loudly to him. I can understand me. And here I ended up not understanding him because he would just go off on these tangents about these load curves and just demand curves and just blow my mind away. So.
Well, thank you guys. I mean, I take a lot of personal gratification from teaching the course, and it actually benefits me a lot because I have a great network of professionals who I know their stuff now, right? Because I was there when they learned a lot of the relevant topics for our clean energy evolution. And it's good to hear some feedback too, because because of COVID and online teaching is now like mandatory. We're thinking a lot about how do we deliver the most value in the shortest amount of time for students, and how do we do it most effectively. So there's a lot of discussion about online classes. How do you make online classes better, more engaging? They've been talking about this reverse learning process, which is kind of interesting, and also asynchronous, having online components and real-time components work together. So we're definitely thinking about, how do we teach better? How do we teach concepts and ways of thinking instead of just teaching facts and numbers?
I honestly would have had a tough time taking our program all virtually.
Yeah.
First off, we were the guinea pigs, as we all know, because there was 4 graduate studies type of courses jammed into 10, 11 weeks on evenings and weekends. And it was just crazy. But, something about being in the classroom, something about the interaction with your fellow students and your teachers, and having those conversations that sometimes went a little too far, in one direction, or maybe they would skew off a little bit, but nonetheless, you learn something from that, and you're just probably not getting that online right now, and that's unfortunate. It's certainly better than nothing by all means, and it does keep people occupied, but there is something to be said about being in the classroom, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I hear you, and part of it too is just the interpersonal relationships. Like, I don't get to know the students. I don't know what they look like, really. I can't put a name to their faces, and when I see them, I won't know who they are. They'll know me, but I won't know them, right? And just a lot of that interpersonal, like getting to know them, getting to know what they're interested in and what they're about, and then I can, work with them and try and make them successful, right? And that to me is the main point. I mean, there's a lot of talk about grades, and I don't know. I don't think that's important. It's, did you learn important things that can help you be successful in clean energy and successful in your job, successful in your career? I mean, if that's a yes, then I'm really happy.
Agreed. Well, I think it's a good segue for us to actually get into the business of clean energy with our headlines for this week. And since we are chivalrous gentlemen here, we will definitely go with ladies first. And Cassandra, I think you had 3 stories that you want to talk about from the headlines?
Terrible.
Yes. So some of these are, as you know, my background is capital markets. It's investment banking and asset management. So anything that relates to that, I'm right on top of. So this was a big item that Duke Energy and Dominion Energy, they've been trying to build this pipeline for a number of years. And it went up in size. First, I think it was $3 billion, then it was $4 billion, and then it got to about $8 billion that they expected in cost. And then between delays and uncertainty, that $8 billion cost, it cracked that point to which they said, okay, we're canceling it. What's really interesting about this is that there's been a lot of clean energy advocates against any expansion in natural gas and pipelines. And understandably, they're environmentally destructive to be able to put this in place. New construction obviously has an expectation that it should be operating for a significant period of time to be able to do this payback. But what's impacted the cost that it rose is just a lot of the legal challenges, which understandably have come. But what most folks don't understand is that people will not finance things if they cannot see the right payback period. And this has shown up in coal, and it's now starting to shift into natural gas as well. One of the biggest drivers is terminal value. How long? What are the revenues I'm going to collect over a period of time? Will they be at a high enough price and cost for me to be able to justify the amount of dollars that I put in? Will it hit the returns for the investors that are putting money into this? And if the answer is no, it doesn't matter if it is the perfect technology or the worst technology, it will not get done. So this is, I think, a big win for clean energy in that new pipes are not being put in the ground. But one of the things that Duke pointed out at the end of the article, and I think we should keep this in mind, is that natural gas in and of itself is not going away. There's been a lot of focus on electricity and power, but not necessarily on what gas does. There's the aspect of how quickly gas plants can be built, what they can do to cover peak demand, and even heating gas in terms of what you're using in your house and your residential. Until a solution is found for that, gas in and of itself isn't going away. And one of the things that I've seen at least a couple of companies looking at and thinking about is, how do I make this pipeline that's already there in certain cases, how do I make it more efficient so at least I'm getting the most out of it while it's existing and operating? And then what solutions can we put in place to eventually remove it? So big win in a certain category, but the broader solution isn't yet been found for replacing natural gas.
Yeah, agreed. I think it was a great story. I think it's a great one for you to lead off with. Obviously fracking, as Lucas is pointing out right now, has always been controversial. I come from a part of the country where all the natural gas plants that come online have replaced coal plants. So you can certainly make the argument that, natural gas definitely burns at less carbon than coal burning plants. So, I don't think gas is going away for a while, but I do think the long-term solution that gas is really going to be a bridge energy to clean energy. And that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, I wasn't going to bring this article up because I didn't want to pour salt on our opponent's wounds, but this is a huge win for renewables. So this is fracked gas that won't hit the marketplace, and it's hoped that renewables can replace this so that we don't have to have gas pipelines anymore. So I might take the devil's advocate position here that, there was a reason why this pipeline was being built, and there's a massive constraint on pipelines in the Northeast, and consumers can't get enough natural gas. And so, I can only see prices going up for natural gas in the Northeast. And I can see a lot of people being confused about this, because if you look at the, New York Merck's price on natural gas, that's down in Oklahoma where there's plenty of it. That's not in New York and Massachusetts where there's a lot of constraints. So people are going to be looking at their natural gas bills saying, why are my prices going up when I look in the paper and I see it's cheap, super cheap down in Oklahoma? It's because they can't get it up here.
Right.
So, you're going to see costs. So, the final statement they made is we should be investing, in energy efficiency, wind and solar. But if you're going to do wind and solar, you also have to have electrification. So that means people got to move from natural gas furnace, natural gas water heater to electric. So there's a lot in here, and it's not just a simple transition from fracked gas pipeline to solar. There's a lot of steps here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good story though. All right, next up.
Yeah.
So in the solar world, this was a big acquisition. So Sunrun did an acquisition of Vivint Solar, and it's now, honestly, I think together they are top of the U.S. home solar market, solar installations. And what's interesting to me is this. Obviously, this was in the works. This is not a coronavirus hit, let's merge. This is definitely a conversation that started before that. But one of the things that was seen in the private equity markets is that just because a deal was planned doesn't mean it got executed. So I actually find it interesting that this was executed at a time when what it looks like for residential solar construction is deeply at risk. I just think it's a relatively expensive deal to do right now. Solar residential, if you've all experienced the phone calls or the door knocking, it's high customer acquisition cost. While there are efficiencies, and I always think efficiency versus synergy, not necessarily the same thing. There are going to be efficiencies in that they can close a number of offices because they have overlapping territories. I think that will allow them to say, hey, we're covering the same area with less people. But broadly, I think the residential solar acquisitions, installer acquisitions, when you have a number of them going bankrupt or at least treading, it's what happens in a difficult market, but I never necessarily see them as good deals. The second piece of this is that because of those efficiency, because they're closing offices, this is going to add to jobs impacts when we're already seeing a lot of employment loss broadly across the US. So I thought it was, an interesting deal to happen at the time. And Vivint, as you've seen in the past, has had some issues, regulatory issues, of which they said that they've cleared. So Sunrun, is obviously taking that on. And we'll have to see the next 12 to 18 months as to whether this was a good deal or not.
Do you think Vivint was having cash flow problems? Do you think this is a white knight kind of thing?
I've heard rumors back and forth, and it's hard to say. I think it's just broadly residential solar sales are hard, and that's why the customer acquisition costs are high. When you combine that into individual, large entities like Vivint, like Sunrun, sometimes you have no choice but to do a deal to stay alive and hope that the public markets will continue to fund you. So someone needed to do this deal to do it right now. Right. I won't say which one.
So I think two things out of this article or around the event itself that's interesting. One is, I think I read a different article that simply said, the cost savings are great, but it actually doesn't address the fundamental problem taking place in the immediate, which is, the customer focus. You can't get into the houses right now. People don't want visitors coming into their houses because of COVID. So this merger doesn't actually solve that immediate problem, even though there's synergies on the customer acquisition scale of it. So that's number one. And then the second thing about this that really is intriguing, this article focuses on the size of the combined company relative to Tesla. And a couple articles I read very focused on the same metric or the same relative scale. And it makes me laugh that Tesla is now becoming a benchmark for conversation in so many different areas of clean energy that there's always like a comparison to Tesla, and particularly in this case, who I think they're dropping to the number 3 player right now.
Yeah.
So.
By a significant jump.
Yes, big time.
Yeah, I actually like this merger a lot. I think, there was a study done a while ago that the biggest cost for solar is the soft costs. It's not the panel costs. So you see panel costs coming down, but the price isn't going down. And you're like, why? The panel costs are going down. Because like you said, it's so hard to sell. They spend so much time and effort on marketing. And then each roof is different. So they have to engineer a different solution every time. And the technology maybe isn't stable. So all these soft costs need to come down. And actually a larger company is much better for that because the efficiencies of scale come in, the standardization come in. So I actually disagree with this article saying it's not going to help bringing down persistently high customer acquisition costs. I think it is going to help that just even by bringing more standardization to the process. So I like this.
Yeah. Very good. So I think we have one more article from Cassandra.
Right. Oh, this is my personal favorite. So just a couple of weeks ago, the House pushed out what they're calling the Move Forward Act or Moving Forward Act. And it's a big, massive infrastructure package with a lot of focus to clean energy. The article here was more of a, if you'd like to look at the whole bill, it's 2,039 pages in PDF, so we can share that link. But I would say this was a nice summarization of the key points to it. My personal favorite is a little bit further down. It talks about the addition of other energy technologies into tax credits. The tax credits that you see in the ITC and the PTC and what they've done for solar and wind is just huge. It's really made it more cost effective to be able to do those installations. So the extension of tax credits to other areas, so storage, waste heat recovery, biogas, so really into efficiency, gives a chance to supercharge those projects, which will broadly, when we think about wanting to get to a net zero energy future, that means that every single part of the ecosystem, not just power generation, but more efficient technologies, alternative fuels, whatever works for a particular region, and then eventually what we're going to see in grid and transmission, all of those need to come together in a more efficient fashion to be able to hit that goal. So it's nice to see an infrastructure bill that covers that. Where this gets interesting, though, and I'm sure everyone probably knows now, this effectively died in the House. So the Senate said before it even got out the House that it wasn't going to get to the Senate floor for rulemaking. But the other side of this is that this was a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. This morning, today, Biden, candidate for presidency for the Democrats in November, has released a statement that he's looking for a $2 trillion infrastructure bill. So I like the upsizing in it, but it's also kind of pointed out that there is at least, and I don't want to set this up as sort of a political thing, because I've also been hearing that in both sides of this, everyone is aware that we need energy solutions, infrastructure changes, whether you call it climate or you call it energy solutions, it's, everyone is thinking about it. But I like the fact that, this is not going to die. This infrastructure bill came out. Maybe this one doesn't go forward. We'll see what happens in November, what happens there. But there is a lot of interest and a lot of awareness that the U.S. broadly needs a very, very large infrastructure bill to help support the energy technologies and solutions to get to just a more sustainable future broadly.
I like this because this is a clear mimicking, in my opinion, and rightfully so, of the EU's kind of climate response to the COVID-led economic crisis. They are all in about spending, euros on infrastructure redevelopment that is purely tied to clean tech. This is the kind of first salvo by the House Dems to kind of do something very similar. I think it's robust. And I do think as time goes on, this will become more bipartisan. I think a lot of people are starting to realize that this is kind of the horses out of the barn, and that clean tech is moving forward. I listened to a speech by Vice President Pence 2 weeks ago where he was at the unveiling of an electric truck that's going to be made in Ohio. And he was all in about this electric vehicle, as was the Republican Department of Energy, the White House DOE. So it's starting to become a little bit more bipartisan. I think that's great. And everything here, the tenets of this bill are very sound, and happy that Biden, if he wins, will even increase the spending.
Yeah, obviously we love the electric vehicle tax credit extension, up to 600,000 vehicles per manufacturer. That's awesome. And the energy tax credit extension's also great to see. So this will be a big deal for the clean tech economy.
Yep. Excellent. Well, these are 3 really good articles. We really appreciate them. So I think, Lucas, do you want to go next, or should I go next?
You're up next there.
All right. Well, Green Tech Media is definitely a source we've been quoting. A lot of great stories out of them. This was another one, I think, that was just a win-win for clean tech and the consumer. And enormous step for energy storage as courts uphold FERC Order 841, which is opening wholesale markets for energy storage. This case, I believe, came out of the New England area here up in New York. And it's going to really change the paradigm and just bring in energy storage into wholesale electricity markets. And developers will have more flexibility, and the state public utilities and the utilities themselves are going to have less ability to restrict energy storage development right now. So it's a win-win for everyone. It's really good for infrastructure development, especially on wind and solar, because we all know that storage needs to complement those power generation devices and those facilities and projects. So I like this one a lot. I'd be happy to get your opinions from both of you guys.
I think it's just a great move broadly. Access to wholesale markets, and it's sort of like, how would I explain it? Wholesale markets are really where the margins exist and the ability to move the needle exists in terms of pricing. So being able to require access to wholesale markets for energy storage allows broader, more flexible solutions that will have, for the end user, more options in terms of pricing and solutions. So I think it's a great move. And there's obviously, the states will still have a bit of control in some of the specifics, but it won't be anything that effectively removes that access, because that's been set up pretty clearly here.
Yeah, this has always been kind of a sticking point in the electricity grid, that the utility kind of handles a lot of your delivery and your billing, and your ESCO handles all your activities in the wholesale market. So a lot of times they keep retail kind of out of the wholesale market. So right now, if you put a battery in your garage for your house, or in your development, it's really difficult for you to play in the wholesale market. You would usually have to go through an ESCO. So kind of clearing this up and making this clear and making it easy for people to install solar at kind of relatively small amounts, still participate on the wholesale grid is a very big deal, and just providing clarity here will help a ton. This is great.
So, I mean, the end result should be people who are going to have rooftop solar, who are participating, quote, in the wholesale market by selling that energy directly as it's generated, is now going to have the capacity to actually put a battery in with it, right? So it kind of, how do you say, it eases the flow, if you will. It's going to ease, I think, the burden on utilities, because it's going to actually, distribute when power can actually be sold into the market from a timing standpoint, because people are going to have more access to batteries. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, so they put it here, right? I just had it. Basically, distribution level connections must have the option to access wholesale markets. So that didn't exist before.
Right.
So this is a big deal.
I think it's a win-win. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
You want to move on?
Yeah. So the next three stories, I'm going to kind of do a batch introduction, but talking to a lot of friends and colleagues over the last couple of weeks, there's something going on in the world of hydrogen. And for us Americans, it kind of seems new and fascinating that we're still talking about hydrogen, or it seems to be in the headlines. But really, the catalyst for hydrogen development is coming out of the EU, and it's coming out of Asia. It seems like they have never stopped their development of a hydrogen infrastructure, whereas in the US, it's really ebbed and flowed, especially in the early 2000s, where I think California was really building out a hydrogen infrastructure, and then it really stopped, and for either market conditions, regulatory issues, or all of the above. So the next series of articles are just kind of reconfirming that hydrogen is still here, and it may even be growing exponentially. And I know some hydrogen stocks are doing quite well. This one here is just out of the UK, just a kind of a miniature Richard Branson, if you will, a gentleman entrepreneur in the clean tech space, is really being a catalyst for growing the UK's hydrogen economy by putting hydrogen buses on the road throughout the whole country. And I guess there's a couple the government is in support in favor of it. And so you're seeing here development of hydrogen buses, which is not being talked about that much in the US. However, there are some technology companies that are trying to do zero emission hydrogen fuel technology in the US. And I think California is trying to lead that as well. So I just like this story. Again, this is kind of on the ground type of development of clean tech, and in ways that consumers can use it every day.
Boris buses. Okay, I see.
He kind of looks like Boris Yeltsin.
Boris Johnson, yeah.
Not Boris Yeltsin.
You want to go to the next one?
Yeah, we can go to the next one and decide.
Yeah.
They're very similar. So,
isn't that right?
This is out of H2 View, so obviously a hydrogen trade magazine. But California's largest capacity hydrogen station is opening for business, right? Again, here's another story where I know 15 years ago, California was really leading the charge on hydrogen. A lot of the OEMs like Honda, et cetera, all had hydrogen vehicles. But the infrastructure really wasn't built out. And I think there was a lot of argument that electric is going to win out over hydrogen for consumer automobiles, mainly because you don't only have to build last mile infrastructure for electric vehicle charging, whereas you don't in hydrogen, you have to build out greater infrastructure.
Yeah.
But it just seems like it continues to move forward. And here's a story where California is leading the charge within the United States. So I think that's great. And why don't we go to the last one real quick, and then we'll explain that.
Well, this was Arnold's doing, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger started this whole thing. Arnold. No?
Yeah. Your Arnold impersonation is worse than your pirate impersonation.
I think it was that bad. It was in the realm.
Thank you.
And then I thought this one is actually really good too. A waste to hydrogen project being set for California. Again, Louisiana Construction Group, Ways2H, based in Long Beach, California. And I think it's Ford, Bacon and Davis, a Baton Rouge company, and EPC are trying to build a hydrogen production facility again. And renewable hydrogen is being talked about more and more. And so you're seeing a facility here getting built. And so now we're talking about waste generation converting to hydrogen power. So I didn't bring this article up. Maybe we'll talk about it next week. But the EU came out this week again with a hydrogen economy policy. They are all in on hydrogen development. So, is the U.S. behind the curve on it? Possibly. Can we make up for it and do so quickly? Again, it's very possible. So.
Yep. Again, like a big problem with EVs is energy density, right? Gasoline still wins as far as energy density. So if we can get something like hydrogen that's energy dense and fully renewable, that's a win for us.
Yep.
I like this idea of, and the nice thing about, for example, the EU developing or Asia developing a technology first, and then when it eventually comes here, you get to do the add-ons. And what I like about the add-ons of like, okay, let's just not do hydrogen and then see how that goes for a couple of years. Let's do waste to hydrogen. Let's get in front of it and think about the whole solution from start to finish. That's something that's great to see. And California just consistently is just right at the front of this. They also may have a lot more space than a lot of us to be able to do so. But this is actually a really great project.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, because a lot of these types of development projects can actually use existing technology coming out of Asia that was maybe used for a different type of hydrogen project development, but can be easily transferable. So it's like, the person that makes the first DVD player spends a lot of CapEx. The one that makes a second DVD player spends a little bit less CapEx. And I think there is something to be said about that. And I've stayed on the sidelines about exploring hydrogen because I felt that it wasn't going to be developed here. Now I feel like it needs a second look, and we should be taking a second look from both a technology standpoint and a policy standpoint.
Well, and I think it's cool because it kind of looks like a SpaceX rocket. I don't know why, but I thought that was great.
All roads lead to Tesla now?
Oh, no.
See?
Oh, you got me.
Consciously.
You got me on that one.
All right. Well, I think those are my articles. Lucas, you want to go into yours?
All right, cool. Oh, I just wanted to say one more thing. Back with your GTM article on Order 841, they actually have a link to the court opinion. And I usually avoid court opinions like the plague, but I started reading this one and it's surprisingly readable. So if you really want to know what was really at the root of Order 841, they just spell it out in plain English. So I definitely recommend that. Yeah, so I was kind of light this week. I wanted to bring up a big research report I found on the future of the electric grid. This one's out of MIT, so it's straight out of energy.mit.edu. And I wanted to bring this up because it basically agrees with everything I've been saying about the future of the electric grid, which I love to hear. So I'm just going to go over the main findings here from the executive summary. The big ones being need more transmission facilities across state lines, and we need to empower FERC to make sure that happens. So that I've been preaching for a while now. So I love to see that. Um, you know, they talk about advanced metering technology, which would be great so that we know when power is being used and customers know when power is being used. Customers can see the time varying costs of their power. Right now, we don't have a lot of that on the grid, so that's great. The biggest one was customer charges that do not vary with the volume of electricity consumption. So this has been something I've been preaching for a while now. I'm sure you guys have heard it from me over and over again. Just so many volumetric charges on your electric bill don't make any sense. They don't vary with how much energy you use. They should not be volumetric rates. So getting rid of these volumetric rates is very important to making sure that we don't have all these adverse outcomes because we're just not charging for what the cost is. So I'd love to see these volumetric rates go. There's no good reason why we have them. They talk about cyber attacks. This is definitely something we're going to be addressing. I know there's a FERC conference coming up about how do we protect the grid now that we have all these IoT devices being attached. So they're right on the money with some of the stuff. I can't agree more. It's a great report if you have the time to read it. Definitely take a look. A lot of interesting information in here, 280 pages, but you know, maybe you can start with the challenges, opportunities, and major recommendations. Just chapter 1 is a good place to start. So.
Awesome. Cassandra, what do you think?
I was going to say 280 pages is smaller than the infrastructure bill by like 10. So, you know, if you can't get to the 2,000 pages, the 200 or so is a good range to be in. Definitely smaller than Dodd-Frank too. I can also confirm that one. No, but I actually will, I will take a look at this myself a little bit later on, because I think what's the nice cycle that you see in clean energy is that it always does start in the academic arena with just sometimes making very, very plain statements of what the solution should be. And then that tends to spur people to think of like, what is the type of company I should be building? Where is the space that I should be going? And there has been a lot of focus on smart metering, on IoT, a lot of the software focus. That's where a lot of the investment has gone into. But there's a lot more around there, and there's a lot of solutions that it will take to work in conjunction to get to a sustainable grid. So I think this is great. I'm going to take a look at it and get, not all 200, but at least 50 or so.
Yeah, I promise I'm just going to look at the pictures, but I'm okay with that. You know, I guess my points are really, you know, we've been talking, it seems like, for 20 years, and I almost feel like it goes back to the blackout of 2003 in New York about how archaic our grid transmission is in the United States. And we really need to solve the bottlenecks, and we haven't solved the bottlenecks. Some of it is going to just be straight out infrastructure build that'll solve it, but a lot of it can also be based on greater efficiencies generated from software, from metering technologies, et cetera. It's an all the above solution, so it's great to see MIT tackle this.
Yeah, and they talk about smart grid too, which we're definitely going to need if all these people start attaching their storage to the distribution system. Distribution system is going to need a huge overhaul, so that's very important. Oh, and I want to sneak one in real quick. We didn't get the pipeline, but we did get the transmission line built. This is great. This is the Grain Belt Express transmission line. Also very difficult to get through, lots of legal challenges, but this is critical for us because a lot of wind resources in the middle of the country here in Kansas, Nebraska, and all the load centers are on the East Coast. So this grain belt was designed to bring gigawatts, many gigawatts from the wind resource here in the Great Plains and bring it over to the load centers in the East. So this will attach to PJM, which is great because I'm in PJM. So this will help us with our renewable goals in New Jersey. It's just fantastic. Much better outcome than having the pipeline complete. So.
And for those in our audience that don't know what PJM is, Lucas?
Oh, PJM is the largest regional transmission operator in the U.S. It's actually here in this study if you want to see it. It's Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland, and it's the wholesale grid operator for those states. It's in the blue here.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I think this goes exactly to the MIT study, which is you know, it's going to be an all the above solution, but we definitely need to build some of that infrastructure out, especially wind's biggest issue has been getting wind from the source point to the market. So this is a great win, and happy to see it.
Yeah. So it was a great week.
It was a great week. And, you know, before we wrap up with our article for this week, you know, we were really happy to have Cassandra as our first guest. She's been a dear friend of both of us for several years now, a great sounding board to many of us. We've had conversations over beer and wine and, you know, just about everything else. And we thought it would be good to talk a little bit about what's happening in today's world. Obviously, in the United States, we are finally, rightfully, really making some progress, at least in getting awareness out there about issues with diversity. And it's been, you know, something that has been long overdue. And there's been articles out there that have been talking about clean tech and diversity. And we just thought, you know, our perspective is one thing, but getting Cassandra is definitely going, you know, a little bit deeper into the subject. So we really wanted to, you know, see what Cassandra is thinking about that, because the two articles that we were talking about prior to taping, or the two themes, were the coronavirus pandemic is actually, you know, talked about the fact that a lot of urban areas in the United States are getting, people there are getting impacted more, and there's socioeconomic reasons for it, but clean energy could be a part of the long-term solution from a health standpoint. But the one thing we also wanted to focus on was, when you look at clean tech and you look at what happened in the IT boom, you know, diversity is never or hasn't been a priority. And should it be a priority, and how should we structure that priority? So we wanted to get Cassandra's thoughts before we wrap up for today.
So diversity is a really hot, you know, it's a hot topic in terms of that. Obviously, you know, what we're going through right now, both the protests around the country, what we're seeing with coronavirus, people care about it, but it's also a hot topic in terms of, like, it's fire. When you touch it, it starts to bring up sensitivities, and people start to say, you know, questions like, should I be making a hire for the purpose of diversity, or is it the best person for the job? Do they have the skill set? And one of the things I like to identify, that definition of best person is actually more subjective than we like to think. Because one of the biggest challenges of diversity is that it starts at the top of the funnel. And in this case, when we think of industry jobs and clean energy, we're in many cases talking about engineering jobs and engineering innovation. And that starts where? It starts in our engineering schools. I actually went to engineering school at the beginning. I didn't stay all the way through the end. And one of the challenges was, at the time I went to engineering school, I went from a public high school where we had a fair, you know, diversity of all types, to an environment that was at least 85% male, at least. I could probably be off. It could have been even more skewed in gender direction. And what happens in certain environments is that you tend to stick to who feels most comfortable to you. It's not necessarily malicious activity, but if you have a lack of diversity at the top of the funnel in engineering schools, by the time someone gets through, and engineering school is already challenging in and of itself, it's not that maybe a person who didn't have the right skill set wasn't able to get through, but if you're not finding people in the right study groups to help you work together, if you're not building those relationships, if you're not comfortable with people that are different than you, in this case, a lot of it is gender-based, by the time you get to the end of the program, a lot of people have moved on to different things, or they may start in the industry and not stay in it. And when you think about clean tech companies that are doing very well, a lot of the folks have been in industry before they started a company, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. They have all this time in seat. And if you just don't have it because someone left at the beginning or closer to the top of the funnel before you get here, then all of a sudden you don't have potentially enough people, or you don't necessarily or you may not feel you have the time to go find the right people to give that access and that breadth of diversity to your board, to the senior people in your company. And then it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. So that's that piece. Why does diversity matter? Because differences of opinions matter. I worked at a company or have been in various situations where when you're thinking about what are the products we build or what are the marketing strategies we have, there are a lot of folks who didn't actually have hands-on experience on this one particular experience I'm thinking of in actual construction work or anything of that nature. So they were deploying an energy product or an energy solution, and they're like, oh, it's going to take like 5 days to do that. And I'm like, you have not been in renovating any building in New York City. You think it's going to take 5 days? It's 3 weeks just to look at it. But why was I able to give that perspective? Because I grew up in an urban environment. I had a brother in engineering, and my dad was a Con Ed utility guy for 35 years. So I get a sense of what that world looked like. And that diversity shows up in all sorts of ways. So we're talking often about racial and gender diversity, but it matters in how companies engage with markets, how the solutions that they build, the products that they build. And so if you don't have diversity woven throughout your company from top to bottom, you are not actually serving a population, which does, if your company doesn't look like the population you're serving, you're not serving the population. So I think diversity is huge. I think there's a couple of challenges to get there, but I don't see how you get to the target solutions that you want in a way that is equitable and works for everyone without solving it, both in education and in industry.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. The education part's interesting for me because you talked about it at the university level. I just wonder also, when you go all the way down to, say, elementary school, junior high, et cetera, how many times there are people, women, minorities, et cetera, that have the hopes and dreams of going down into an engineering route. But the structure of the educational institutions, even at that level, start putting roadblocks up for people. I feel like there's a lot of it. So it's hard to know where to actually address, where to hit it at. I totally agree, the college level.
I'll take a shot. It happens before. I agree with you. I was in a high school program, which was, and high school programs in New York City where we are if you think diversity is a hot issue, you talk about education in this city and what should be done in public education versus not. And it's currently going through quite a period of how do we make high schools, also our specialized high schools in this state, more diverse. But I was in a high school program which was focused on minority students or diversity backgrounds, and focused on, it was called the Gateway to Medicine program. And it has produced a number of doctors. I'd say like 25% of my graduating class are doctors. The other 25% are in accounting or finance. And then we got a good portion that went into engineering. But that program started at 14. And it was very much a definitive expectation of both resources and expectations. So these two things happen. It's nice to have high expectations, but if you don't provide resources, it's not going to work. And you can provide all the resources in the world, but if you don't tie it to very clear learning expectations and planning, then you also don't get a great outcome. So the thing I like about this program is that it was targeted. It had a great combination of resources and expectations, and it produced a lot of graduates that have gone to a number of different careers of which you don't see typical, that level of diversity. So the biggest question is, how do you expand that? How do you open up those options at a younger level where there's curiosity, where there's interest, and there's an ability to make that foundational? I think it does start before college. I don't know if it starts as early as kindergarten. Kids right now are learning more languages at 5 than I could probably speak now. But it's somewhere between those 2 points to which you can really start thinking about resources and target outcomes, and bringing those two together to help guide younger people into careers that they may not know about, or giving them options that they may not have been told that they have.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I think we're moving in the right direction, but there are a finite amount of resources, and so we have to be very smart about how we allocate those. Lucas, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess you brought up the hiring decision, and I think that really resonates me. When I first managed a team and I sought out other managers, and asked them how they make the hiring decision, I was shocked at how little time and energy most managers put into the hiring decision. And it's just so important, and it has such an effect on your team and your team's success that it's just the most important decision you could probably make as a manager. And I also disagree with a lot of kind of concepts about who to hire. A lot of people hire for skills. They have a skills matrix, the keyword matching. And I just think that's all wrong. I think skills you can teach. I think attitude and character are much harder things to teach. And I think, that's much more diverse pool of people, right? People with a can-do attitude, that's a much bigger pool. You could have the smartest person on your team, but if they don't have a can-do attitude and they give up on everything, then they don't contribute, right? Whereas someone with a can-do attitude that's driven, that's overcome adversity in their life, these people are incredibly valuable and they find a way to solve problems, and that's the employee you want every time. So
I guess I wonder, and it's interesting. I think about my earlier days in investment banking where, first of all, we spent a lot of time there. I think we still do in a bank, but I definitely can think of managers that I've had who I honestly think we spent more time with each other than I did with my parents growing up. Like I saw them day in, day out, or spoke all the time. And that sort of process of not just internships, but what non-PC was called journeymanships, or like having that sort of um, ongoing process, not necessarily in replacement for education, but something that continues not just during the summer period, but throughout. And also with an expectation of that you are also funding it. You see this in unions still, and the electrical union or things like that. What is clean energy doing in that same space to create learning opportunities early on before someone maybe has their PE license or has been practicing for a number of years. Two, it gives you a chance, and I think part of why hiring is challenging, it's hard to have two conversations with someone and know them very well. So how do you create an opportunity to get them to know them better over a period of time? And also, when we think about those relationships and someone that I'm comfortable with, it takes 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 conversations to get really comfortable with someone, even if you didn't know them at the beginning. And so instead of doing the snap judgment if someone went to the same school as I did or that has the same general background, or why don't we start creating those opportunities to create the relationships? And so doing that over time means that by the time someone either has finished school or is still early on, you're meeting the people, you have the network, you have the relationships. Maybe some of this stuff goes away a bit. I think you still see that in, I know Germany does apprenticeship programs. This is the word I was looking for, walking around it, apprenticeship programs. How do we, or can we create that in this industry that is still at, I think it's earlier stages, and make that just part of how you get into clean energy?
Yeah, I agree. I've seen very successful apprenticeship programs over the years, and you're absolutely right. Like, sometimes kids at that age, especially that development age where they're deciding what they want to do, they just need a little bit of hand-holding, a little bit of tough love, a little bit of guidance, and then all of a sudden they start having the ability on their own to formulate ideas, opinions, and they start having a confidence with their competence and what competence they actually have. And it just takes a little bit of effort on that. And to Lucas's point as well, hiring is done based upon box checking, and it still is done that way today. And we're not looking at things holistically. And I hope we start making changes to that as time goes on. And I do think diversity is going to be a major factor going forward. I feel like what happened, sadly, with George Floyd is one of the greatest catalysts for, I hate to say greatest, that's not the right term, but it is a catalyst to really have a better, more deeper, sincere conversation in this country. So it's good for us in the long run, we hope.
okay, so thank you for coming on, Cassandra.
This is really fun. I
great.
enjoyed this. I hope this was useful.
Yeah, next time we're going to get Lucas to allow us to actually have a beer while we're doing this, and we can hold it up and maybe get alcohol sponsors.
And we have a gift too. You get your own eye patch. So we'll send this to you. I'll disinfect it and send it to you as soon as.
I would like an eye patch. That would be great. I will take a photo in it, and I will plug it on LinkedIn or something.
There you go. Great.
Well, this has been great. Thank you for being our first guest. I think you're setting a very high bar for other guests in the future, but that's okay. We strive for greatness around here. And always my disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed by ourselves are those of ourselves, and not any organizations we are necessarily affiliated in. But this is great. Episode 6 of Pirates of Clean Tech. I'm Eric.
Yep. Hold on. Before we go, make sure you click the like button if you liked it,
Oh, yeah.
and click the subscribe button if you want to get notified whenever our new videos show up. And, as always, we'd love to hear from you. So provide your comments below. Any ideas or suggestions or criticisms of my hair, feel free to put in the comments section.
And you can find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. So we're kind of diversifying our resources. So
Also
fantastic.
Twitter. Yeah, and we're on Twitter also. So
Clean Pirates.
those links will be below.
We're hitting all of them.
Yep.
All right. Well, anyways, great talking to everyone. Cassandra, thank you again. And we'll see you all next week.
Thanks for having me.
Arg. Arg. Do your arg, Cassandra. Arg.
Arr.
Yes.
Ours isn't bad. Better than ours.
Okay.